Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Church of the Dungeon Preacher. My name is Mike, and today I'd like to talk to you about design and 3 reasons why you should get rid of the term homebrew from your vocabulary. I think a lot of the times when people approach the problems of designing their own games, their own systems, their own material for role playing games, it's a kind of a weird disconnect between you and what you feel like you as a lowly mortal can do and what the great designers are capable of. I think especially in the D&D 5e community, I've seen a lot of people that really seem to kind of treat the the rule book as sacrosanct and to really lean on the creators of the game for how you ought to play the game and running even monsters that you have created by the players via Twitter in order to get them to put their stamp of approval on what you've made. This to me is indicative of a bad culture about design and homebrew in general. And really, part of the term is we have this word homebrew at all. What is homebrew even? The game, and this is what I want to get on to my first point here. Design is for everyone. And of course, part of this is game designers don't really know any better than you do. Here's the thing: the people who we hear this term rules as written or raw, and to me that seems and here's the secret of rules as written is that the original designers of D&D, I'm talking Gary Gygax and those guys, they did not play rules as written. They cobbled together their rules as they went, growing out of war games and things like that. They added on rules until they got somewhere that they wanted them to be. If you look at those early character sheets, you will see just lists upon lists of skills and stats and like, what was the game that complicated? No, a lot of those things are probably added on as they went. New ideas just making it into the game and being resolved as they played. Rules as written, there's no reason to have the rules as the sacrosanct thing, or the game designers even as being in some ways better than you are. The very first designers of the game did not play rules as written, and so you should consider kind of not doing that yourself. I think the other thing about this we might the other thing about this concept of design is for everyone is I think we get scared because we think our game has to be perfect. The game has to be just right, just the right balance, it has to fit just right into games as the game as it currently exists. That it has to be perfectly balanced and understood. And I think there's a lot of problems with this way of thinking. For one thing, I don't really think balance is real. And that's a whole nother discussion. But balance is only really real in a game like 5e if you're only thinking about combat. If you're only thinking about like arena style combat, even, where everyone's already had a full rest and the circumstances of the game haven't changed at all. And if that's the only way you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, I'm sorry, but you're going to have a boring game. Those don't have to be perfect. They can fulfill specific needs that you have for yourself at your table. Do you want to play a game where you are playing Sky Pirates? Well, you might say, well, I'll just take D&D 5e and use that, and you could, but we might say, well, maybe the Dragonborn doesn't really fit necessarily with my setting. Tieflings don't really make sense. We don't really have any devils or anything in this game, you know. And so once you get around that, you can start chopping. And people have kind of been put off by this. We are put off by the idea that we're going to take something away or add something that's just not quite right. And I just think you should toss all that thought out of your mind. Design is for everyone. And part of the reason you should toss it out of your mind is because you are designing already. Any adventure you've made, any ruling that you made where the rules didn't seem to quite make sense, any character ability or magic item or monster that you've made that hasn't been something specifically published by Wizards of the Coast or whatever game system you're using by those people, you are doing your homebrewing. And really, if that is all homebrew, then what is design but this tiny little insignificant thing that has now been built upon over and over by all these players and different people that are publishing these books? You are designing already. And I think because of that, we really ought to be doing this idea of homebrew and turn towards how we're all already engaged in design. I think we're engaged in it in really one specific way, and this brings me to my next point, is that you should feel free to kit bash. Now, I actually made this video because I was really inspired by Miscast's video on making their own system called Arcane Ugly. I would heavily recommend checking those videos out. I will link some of them in the description. And because of his videos talking about him making his own system, I started making my own system that I thought kind of was getting at some of the ideas he was getting at. I've called it Grot and Grime, and you can see it on my blog. I'll once again link that in the description as well. And this is the first part about kit bashing. And kit bashing is this attitude where you with the model community where they take all these different pieces of that they find in a box of sprues, all these different little model pieces, and they make what they want out of these different model pieces. So it is nothing like what they were originally what the original designers thought was going to be made with those pieces, but they made it into something new and wonderful all the same. That's what kit bashing is. I think we should have that same attitude when it comes to role-playing game design. You want to be kit bashing. You want to take the pieces that works, keep what suits you, and throw out what doesn't, and make your own interesting little game. And also part of this is you want to steal ideas. Like I said, I took a lot of ideas from Miscast videos when I was making Grot and Grime. I'm not selling Grot and Grime to anyone. And actually, part of what I made as a part of Grot and Grime is that I took from different blogs and just used their tables as a part of the game. Here's the thing, you're like, well, that's not really designing. You're not making your own game to sell, but design has nothing to do with what you do with what you design. That's later. If you want to sell your design, if you want to make it something that you can publish for other people to use and you make money off of, then sure, you need to be more original and maybe even a little bit more polished. But honestly, with some things these days, I don't think you can even get away with not being polished at all. But really, if you're but design can be something as simple as being used just for your table or your needs or to put out for your blog for people to enjoy for free. It doesn't have to be perfect. And so you can steal ideas. You can take what are good ideas from other places and people and bring it into your new creation. Once again, we're taking different pieces, we're kit bashing and putting them together. Another thing about this is it doesn't have to be original or inventive. Role-playing game designers get in this state where they feel like I have to make something inventive. I have to have this new mechanic. I have to come up with some innovative way of making the game go. And there's nothing wrong with chasing after that, except that generally speaking, that stuff doesn't matter to the players at the table very much. And maybe you'll have a breakthrough, have a mechanic that's really cool and people will really enjoy, but you really need to be designing for the table. And that's our point number 3 today. Is when you are designing, you ought to be designing for the table. I think this is something we kind of often mistake, and this is why people get kind of nervous about homebrew, is that they're like, well, I had a DM, he had a really bad homebrew rule. And that was really weird. It didn't work out very well. And trust me, I've been there. I've made and done bad homebrew rules. And I think there are a couple ways we can avoid that. And I think the first thing is you got to design it for the table. And that means, on one hand, your rules should be fun and not overcomplicated. You're making rules So hopefully to improve the game and to specifically improve the experience of the people at the table with you. When something doesn't make sense, when it's too complicated, when you think you could do it a little bit better or in a different way that you prefer, you know? You should be designing for the fun of the people around you and the fun that you're striving for at your own table. It's not for your own, I think it should be less for your own ego, for your own, for saying, oh, I'll make this rule and that will fix the game for everyone. This is just a superior rule. It should be for your specific context, your specific tastes, and it should be fun. And part of the way you can make sure that your rules are fun is you can get and accept feedback. When you're changing rules of a game that your players already know, you're going to want to get their feedback and also accept their feedback. You want to make rules that are fun for them. And if they say they're not having fun, you should believe them. And you should probably change what you're doing. I think we get into the state where the DM's like, this is my homebrew rule and I like it very much, and you're going to accept it. But really, they should be asking, is this really fun? Are you enjoying this particular rule? I thought it was a good idea, but maybe it's not. You're going to see how it works at the table, and you're going to need to adapt and change it and overcome the obstacles that are opposed by that. And when that happens, the thing to do is to just you've been knocked down, pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and carry on. One thing that I'm currently kind of wondering about with my grind game is one of the starting packages. So it's like I have got fighter, thief, and wizard, and I'm wondering if a fighter package needs to be a little bit better because it seems like a little bit underwhelming compared to the thief or the wizard. So I have a player who's been very helpful in telling me their thoughts about this. Now I've heard from different players and they say different things. I'm going to keep my eye on that problem to see if it becomes something bigger as we go on, and if I feel like I have a better solution for it. And if that happens later time, I will implement that idea and once again start getting and accepting feedback about that idea. The other thing that you can do is, if you're designing for the table, if you're designing for your specific circumstance, design for a purpose. You're making a game for a specific reason. You're changing the game to achieve a specific results. And hopefully you're making them to be easy to use. They should be purposeful and not overcomplicated. Remember, you're just working with the people directly around you, and if you get confused by something, then odds are they're going to be confused by it too. And honestly, even if you're not confused by something, you're probably going to find that your players are going to be like, what is that doing? And don't be dissuaded by the initial fear or anxiety that they get from you changing the rules. Instead, once again, say, bear with me, be patient, and get and accept their feedback and be very open about that. And I think you will find that they will respond in kind. But I'll say this to players. Players, your game master's doing a lot for you. I remember my very first of these dungeon sermons. Love your game masters. Game masters, love your players. And so, because of that, players, you ought to be willing to let your game masters experiment, let them grow, let them design as they will, and game masters, do not put horrible rules on your players and just expect them to bear it. Listen to what they have to say, adapt, and change. Like I said, I've made many games, actually. I haven't actually published many of them, but I've designed for myself and for my table and for my blog and people that read my blog quite a lot. And had some wonderful experiences with these games. One game I made was a game where you don't actually have to create characters when you start playing, but you create the characters as you've played. And that turned out to be a really good game for playing with new people. I'll once again link that in the description. And that has just been it's been a tremendous thing for me to understand that design is for everyone, that I can feel free to kit bash, and that I ought to really be designing for the table. And once you have those things in mind, I think we can stop being so afraid of homebrew and really get rid of the word entirely and instead focus on what we all ought to be doing, what we all can do if we decide to, which is design. So go forth and design. Until next time, I am the Dungeon Preacher, and thank you for joining me today. May God go with you, and may your game master always be merciful.